Hi everybody! Today we're going to spend a few minutes talking about dynamics. And dynamics is just a fancy musical word for volume, how loudly or how softly that we're playing. For example, fortes mean loud and pianos mean soft. But there are a whole bunch of other different dynamic levels, some in between forte and piano, some are different flavors of piano that get softer and softer and softer, and some are different flavors of forte that get louder and louder and louder. And there are many different ways that we can make these different dynamics happen on our instruments. The major go-to that we use and that we talk about when we start learning the differences between forte and piano has to do with arm weight. And it's not with making our arms heavier by tying heavy things to them or making them feel lighter by tying helium balloons to them so that they float, but it's a feeling of heaviness, and it's a feeling of sinking, so that our arm is sinking into the bow and the bow is sinking into the instrument, but never pushing, never pressing. We're never coming down from the top, because then we get crunchies and crispies in our sound. And those are not the sounds that we're looking for. But if we play with an arm that feels like it's sinking, like it weighs 100 pounds and it's sinking down into the floor, then it'll sink our bow into the string as well. And it will be totally free of crunchies. And when we want to play softly, we let our arm feel lighter without floating away from the instrument, but we just take away that sinking kind of feel. All I did was change how heavy my arm felt. Now, arm weight is not the only tool in our toolbox. We could also change the amount of bow that we use. In general, more bow means more sound. However, there is a point where we're using so much bow that there's not time for the bow to actually grab the string and make sound. So more bow up to that point. But to show you, I'm going to play the first two phrases of Good King Wenceslas, and the only thing that I'm going to change is how much bow I'm using. So the second phrase was louder, and all I did was use twice as much bow. My arm otherwise felt exactly the same. Another trick that we can use is paying really close attention to our bow placement. If we let the bow get close to the fingerboard, it's going to get softer and fuzzier, like we put a blanket down over our instrument. And if we bring the bow closer and closer to the bridge, the sound will get louder and brighter and clearer and more present until we get right up onto the bridge, in which case it sounds like we have shards of glass that get stuck in the sound. And if we're playing about the ghost of Good King Wenceslas, that's fine. But in this case, where it's not Halloween, we're getting ready for our winter holidays. So I'm going to first play close to the fingerboard, and then I'm going to bring the bow closer to the bridge. Tell me if you can hear the difference. It became so much clearer when we got closer to the bridge, and that translates into a louder, more present kind of sound. The other thing that we can do is make sure that the louder we want to go, the flatter our bow hair is. If we're leaning the bow off to the side just a little bit, that means that there are some bow hairs that aren't touching the string, and if they're not touching the string, they're not making any sound. So we want really flat bow hair so that we can make use of each and every one of these to grab that sound and pull that sound out of the instrument. So I'm going to play an entire verse of Good King Wenceslas, and I'm going to get louder and louder and louder. But I'm already going to start forte, so these are going to be different flavors of forte. You'll also notice that towards the end, I spent more and more of my bow closer and closer to the frog. That's to take more advantage of arm weight and the weight of the bow itself, because we know that the frog is heavier than the point, right? So if we spend more time closer to the frog, we're going to be able to pull more sound out of the viola. Now let's give some names to some of these louder flavors of forte. So forte we know is one F, and that means loud. But if we see two Fs in the music, that is fortissimo, and that is super loud. And sometimes we might see three Fs in the music. Or if you're playing a Tchaikovsky Symphony 4 or 5, in which case you just make big eyes and try and look like you're screaming through your instrument because you've run out of ways to make your instrument play any louder. And he does the same thing with softs too. You can see 5 or 6 pianos in some of his music. And so we're actually I'm going to take a piece of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker right now that's got several different flavors of forte and sforzandos and fortissimos and sforzandos and fortissimo, and our triple fortes. And we're going to hear all of these different layers and levels of sound. And every now and then I'll drop back a little bit further, but then build again. And there will be one point where it's going to sound like I'm relaxing the dynamic and I'm coming back to fortissimo. It's strange that such a loud dynamic is going to feel like such a relaxing kind of a thing. So here we go. This is just fortissimo. So over this break from school, while you're practicing all the time, because you don't have school any of these days, so you'll have lots and lots of time to practice, experiment with some of these different ways of getting louder and louder sounds without getting any crunchies, right? No pushing, no crunchies. I don't want to hear any crunchies. When we come back in January, have a wonderful break.